Good evening, and welcome to the April 12th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Tonight, we are going to talk about the plans for Old Town. But before we do that, we have to approve the minutes from the last meeting of March 22nd. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of March 22nd, 2018.
Second?
Is there any discussion, changes, corrections? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Excellent.
If you had looked at the agenda online, you would know that we were going to talk about the strategic plan this evening, but that's been changed. David isn't able to get here, so we're going to move that to May,
Sometime
on a May meeting. So with that, we're going to go right into Old Town, and Kristen is going to give us some updates on some of the changes that have been made.
Hello. So why are we here again? So you may remember that we did an update to the Old Town Plan, Old Town Subarea Plan, and you all made a recommendation to PPC, to the City Council, back in April of last year.
Can you talk a little louder?
Sure.
I think your mic's up.
I always feel like I'm too loud, so.
No.
You made a recommendation to PPC back in April 27th to City Council on April 27th last year. And during that, the council saw it 3 times in June, July, and August, and it evolved quite a bit during their review. And it's enough, particularly in formatting and a few other areas, that we thought it was worth, and council thought it was worth, a second look and a second public hearing by PPC. So tonight is just discussion and to talk in particular about 4 points that could change, that have changed. So it's to see what you all think. So what requires a second look? Does this draft capture our previous intent? And I'm assuming that you all have done your homework, and we can talk about that at the end of this. Did we learn anything through the CIP visions that we might want to apply here? Keeping in mind that those visions haven't been adopted yet, but is there something in that process that we want to apply here as well? Are the addition of action items helpful here? And you may recall that you all made a recommendation that Old Route 10 be removed from the Central Issaquah plan, and now it's hanging out there. And so should that be added, or at least a part of it added, to Old Town? So primarily what changed is the format. When we looked at the new one and we looked at the old one and we looked at the policies, they were many more policies, but those policies were still incorporated, we feel, into the existing document. And I need you guys at the end of this to tell me whether you agree with that or not. Traffic calming, I just want to bring it up. Traffic calming was something that was brought up often by residents during the public process, and it came up here as well. So there's a policy still in the plan, but it's also being implemented right now. There's a pilot program going on in Old Town, and discussions have been started with those residents. Parking. The council has directed us to find more efficient parking or a location for a parking site, and a request for proposal is going out very soon to get a consultant to help us do a parking study in the Old Town area. Biggest change is probably the addition of the action items that were not anywhere there before. It sort of mimics the visions. And a potential change, like I said earlier, the boundary change. So I'm going to walk through some of the action items, and obviously the date would probably change. We're already into April of 2018, so maybe 2018, 2019, we'll figure it out, but right now I just want to just be consistent. So one is doing new architectural standards for consistency in how probably single-family homes and duplexes look in Old Town. Code revisions to height in the CBD along the MFH, multifamily high, along Sunset, and in the single-family duplex areas as well. The single-family duplex areas are north and south of Sunset. Code revisions to increase impervious surface in the CBD as well as multifamily high along Sunset as well, and that would go from 50% to 75% in CBD, potentially from currently 85% to 95%, which would match parts of Central Issaquah. Code revisions to allow small-scale retail was something that was discussed in MFH along Sunset. The parking analysis, the cut-through traffic are being addressed. Code revision to adopt the sidewalk use district, which it more easily enables those businesses in Old Town to use their sidewalks. Code revisions to incent live, work, studio opportunities and implement the housing strategy. So those are things that would be soon, first up. Is there anything on this list that should be moved, that is missing, that's not on this list? We can come back to it.
Does the boundary change need to be on this list? Since there's a risk that Old Route 10 might be in a no man's zone
Well, if the-
post-moratorium for a
if-
brief period?
If
Or
the
is that-
boundary changes, it'll be part of the plan update. So it would, these are things that'll happen once the plan is adopted. The boundary
these
change,
are
the
all-
boundary,
these are all post-plan
currently,
action items.
yeah, they're in the new,
Okay.
they're in the new part of the plan as the action items. Yeah, the boundary adjustment would happen with the plan. Okay.
I was curious why the community gardens is on the, kind of the second half, the future plan for implementation, rather than being a sooner action item, and if that was because we didn't have a location, or if it was just,
We don't have a location. That would be part of the parks plan too. That hasn't been adopted, so I don't know where, if that falls in there, and where would that fall, where that would fall in. It can always be moved up, but yeah. And I think things like fixing traffic and things that the task force recommended were a higher priority than probably the gardens.
they are a higher priority as far as the way we function, but I think when we think about everything being so car-centric, it kind of takes away from the heart of what we think of Old Town
Yeah.
being. And so it seems a little counterintuitive to be constantly talking about roads and cars, parking, while important. I don't think that necessarily means that public gathering spaces then aren't a priority, so that's why I was curious why that was put onto that list of things that was future postponed, kind of, implemented in the next phase. And I was wondering if it was just because we simply didn't have a location, it was more of a concept, or?
It's really more of a concept, yeah. But if that's something that you all want to move up, we can talk about it.
I need clarification on number 8, code revision to incent live-work studio opportunities. What's referred to by studio opportunities?
Art.
It's live work, it's a live work studio. So you have studios where artists live and they work in the same building. They do their art in the same building.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, I think this is a good list, but just a couple of general comments. One is, and we could move stuff back and forth all day long, and I'm not sure that's going to accomplish anything, but I liked in the plan, or rather, in the goals that we sort of discussed improving transit options. I mean, it was by accident, I think, but we discussed improving transit options before we discussed providing more parking. And then when we get to the actions, we focus on the parking study at least first in the first year, and then we don't start worrying about better transit options until later. And I know there's this like back and forth as to whether or not if you provide more parking, more people are going to drive. And if, I guess I would like to see improving transit along with providing more parking, kind of talking about those at the same time if we can. So
Okay.
if that works out, fine. I'm not going to worry too much about it, but I think that's useful.
Okay.
And then kind of related to all of that, we have in the right now, the 2019 to 2021, where is it? Something about regional traffic, develop strategies for minimizing impact from regional traffic. I think that's just something we're always doing. So it might be worth thinking about. I mean, and if we do, later this year or later in the first year of this implementation, have a transportation commission or whatever. I mean, it may be something that we want to just not let people think we're not worrying about it, because we're always worrying about it.
Right, okay. All right, anything else?
Similar comment, but then for biking, is there a reason biking is in 19 rather than 18? Is that because of the timing of the streetscape plan?
Is that part of
No, because the streetscape plan actually doesn't include biking in there. So,
Oh, I see, that's 1 and then 2, okay.
yeah. So you're asking why it's not in 2018?
Yeah,
part of that is we need to do an inventory first, and that takes some time, but you're suggesting maybe moving the inventory up?
Yeah, that would
Okay.
make sense.
That makes sense.
I think, again, it would be nice to put that with the parking and transit, just to show them going concurrently.
Yeah.
Assuming you guys have the bandwidth to do all of that.
Okay. All right.
So I noticed the first item. The first item on the 2019 to 2021 implement recommendations from the downtown streetscape plan. So that plan, if I'm not mistaken, was created in 2017?
It was adopted in April 2017.
Okay, so is its implementation waiting on this to be adopted? I don't understand why the two are necessarily linked or that there's a delay on implementing any of those.
Well, part of that, some of it will be implemented this year. Trees will be replaced this year. But you have to put it in here as a way to monitor it and make sure that it really does happen. So it's not just this floating streetscape plan out there.
Yeah.
It's somewhere else that you have action items and say, yeah, don't forget to do that plan out there.
Yeah.
So
Because there were a lot of things in that I think are amazing for the Old Town area. And so I'm kind of looking at this going, are we pushing all of the implementation off to 2019? Or is it just kind of happening as it can? And like you said, this is more about monitoring.
it's happening as it can.
Okay.
Yeah. I knew it. What's up? Yeah?
So I picked the wrong chair. So the way the city funds capital projects is through its capital improvement plan, right? And so right now, if you look at the capital improvement plan, as Kristen mentioned, there's, is it 150,000-ish?
$152,000.
So there's $152,000 to basically put the street trees in that got taken out with the section of the sidewalk that got widened for the stormwater project. But things like Alder Street, the Festival Street, right now that capital improvement plan has funding for that out beyond like 2023. So there's not anything in the next few years to do that. So that's a council decision. And part of what we can do here is if you guys feel like, besides kind of working on the plan, also talking about a different maybe speed at which the streetscape plan gets implemented, that is a message that the council might want to hear if it's going to, because, so funding those things is always about what's the highest priority, right? And so if nobody's kind of knocking on the Old Town streetscape plan as being a high priority, then it just kind of falls into a lower basket and doesn't get funded. So that's one of those things that is going to need some lobbyists for it to move into a more current timeline. So again, I'm throwing that out there, not trying to lobby you guys to do anything, but if you want to move the needle, there's going to have to be some action that comes from groups like PPC and from DIA and from others to kind of get the council's ear on that.
Yeah. Well, I personally think that the streetscape plan was amazing and I'd like to see it implemented. And so I think linking the two and kind of including that in the discussion is probably important.
Okay, and perhaps putting maybe not just the broad implement recommendations from the downtown streetscape plan. Maybe it's implement phase 2 or implement the Alder Festival Street. If there's something specific in there, or the pedestrian park, there are plans in there, some pieces in there for that. If there's something specific too that you all would want to see earlier rather than later, that could go in here as well.
I think that's a great idea. I would love the idea of kind of picking it apart because it was large and it's going to require a lot of funding. And I think that some improvements could happen more quickly than others and be able to make a big change in the community. So I would rather pick parts of it rather than just kind of say all encompassing.
And on that note, breaking it down would help us also identify if there's other major projects that are happening in the transportation side that would affect work that would be done on the streetscape plan and then maybe torn up and then have to be redone.
Yeah.
If we could do things that maybe wouldn't be affected by a major project like that, that's a few years down the road, we could avoid having to redo stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think on the first page, there was something about using the sidewalks as area for the businesses. And that was certainly part of that streetscape plan. So I think going into it and pulling things out is a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, if you can identify things that are of minimal.
So we are going to discuss this again. So the next time around, we can we'll send you a link to the plan as well. And it's broken up a little differently now than it was in the plan, but we can explain that as well. Okay. All right.
Can you talk about number 5 and 6 both?
Are we on the 2019? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Actually, Keith might have to explain both of these. The community engagement program is, 5, the community engagement program is getting the neighbors together, or a group of people together who live in Old Town, reside and work in Old Town on a regular basis, and just having a discussion about what's going on in the area. It's just informational and getting together. We have a community coordinator, getting together with her or different departments just to talk about what's going on, what's working, what's not working, that kind of thing. And then
Are you planning on doing that for all neighborhoods or just Old Town?
we're proposing it for Old Town right now. I think the intent is that eventually it might happen for all neighborhoods. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did I just open up a can of worms?
So the city's comprised of neighborhoods that have some high-functioning homeowners associations, and some don't. And so as we went through Old Town, there was a conversation about how, because there really isn't a homeowners association that gets the neighbors together and gives them opportunities to talk about points of common interest, that maybe the city could serve that function by just hosting meetings. That happens a lot in the Highlands and Tallis. And so, part of the city's turning our neighborhood engagement coordinator into a full-time position was working on kind of evaluating the neighborhoods in the city and kind of getting to that answer. So it wouldn't be all, but there would definitely be, I think, part of it is identifying that opportunity to neighborhoods and seeing if there's an interest. In Old Town, there was an interest. Like, let's say we go to
I'm thinking like Confluence and Gilman, when we start seeing the development that's going to be happening in the next decade.
Right.
I love the idea, and I'm sure you guys love the idea of me proposing more unrealistic work onto your schedule, but even having, twice a year, even if it is something that's more minimal than quarterly, then being able to have a venue for more communities to have that, I think is an amazing idea.
Well, and even outside of upcoming development, it gives the city and council and the mayor opportunity to hear from people and going to them rather than expecting them coming to council.
Especially for areas that are less well-organized,
Yeah.
So again, I realize that is putting more pressure on staff. That's a time commitment, that is a lot, but when we think about how we want to be developing our community, I love this idea of being able to kind of take the work that we do in here and being able to push it even farther out into the community.
Yeah. Well, and quite honestly, that isn't as much on existing staff as it is on Leeson, and giving her the opportunity to have those regular commitments can be a good structure for that new position, so.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was a community person who would like to take that on and help organize that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we were reminding ourselves of number 6. But number 6 has to do with the cottages. We had talked about different kinds of small housing, cottage housing, and other types of housing that can go in here to add housing without destroying the character, allowing residences without allowing, big things. So anyway, this is a toolkit in working with residents to figure out, and working internally and then with residents to figure out how to do that kind of thing, to do infill.
This isn't like an existing toolkit that some organization has established that we're talking about, we're creating this
Correct,
and then adopting it?
correct.
They exist in other communities.
Yeah, Bellingham has one, yeah.
When are we creating it? This says adopt in 2019.
Well, it would be in that,
So is
in that
maybe,
timeframe, it would.
Yeah, somewhere between 2019 and 2021.
Because doesn't that kind of tie into action item number 10 for 2018? Implement the housing strategy by processing code revisions to maintain the increased number of residences in the sub area?
It does. So,
That's what I assumed when I read it, was that
create what?
10 tells me you're
Adopt.
making it now,
You have to make
baking it,
and
and then we'll have it in 2019.
Right.
I got three voices in my head. All
Might be
right.
more than just.
Because it's not actually mentioned in the housing strategy per se. We knew that they were out there when we did the housing strategy, but we hadn't really delved into which pieces of the toolkit we wanted for our own. So that's why we broke it out as a separate part, because it isn't already encompassed in the housing strategy plan. But we did like the whole idea of it, but we just didn't have time to sift through it before housing strategy was done.
Yeah, understood.
But I like the part create.
Yeah, I added create. Okay. Anything else on mid?
I have a question here, a lot less glamorous topic. Number 5 of 2022-2025, make improvements to the internet connectivity to increase the quality and speed of service. If we're already having discussions about small cells, 2022 isn't that long of a stretch. We could certainly do it, but 2025, 5G is already going to be here, and that's the whole point of small cell.
Yeah.
Well, and really, why is the city involved in that when that's really provided by private companies and?
The city does have an, never mind.
So we're not.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm not that familiar with small cells, so but you work in the industry, so
I think
it may be covered by that, yes.
I think the point is that small cell is going to be many little towers throughout the city, and I think it's going to be a visual impact to the community, and I think that's where the city probably needs to address it. It's not necessarily the technology behind it, because they don't own it, but we don't want telephone poles throughout the entire city with multiple dozens of boxes on them.
I think the way that that's the make improvements is vague enough that could end up just accounting for code changes that cover private investment. I think the way that's written is.
They outlined it as a separate bullet, number 5 in 2022, so it's actually separate from that.
Is small cells called out separately?
Well,
No,
that
small
is,
cell.
internet connectivity is small cell.
Can I ask Keith a question? Would this be the Old Town pilot project that was trying to do free Wi-Fi in Old Town that Traeger was working on?
This is what that is.
Okay.
That's not.
Going anywhere yet? Okay.
So
So.
So this is a leftover remnant?
Well, so this is actually could be relevant. So I was in this room last night with a different group talking about the new proposed small cell code for the city. One of the things that code does not allow is new poles on Front Street. And you cannot put the antennas on the existing post and globe that are out there. So the carriers are a little concerned that because the small cells are about capacity, and most of us are using our phones in our cars, and so the capacity demand is on the streets. And Front Street and Gilman are going to be the big usage corridors. And so I like 5, not because the city's providing any service, because we're actually taking away what horrible service we're providing now. But it's because I think that there could be an issue They don't know it yet because none of them have actually tried to put facilities along front. So the code allows you to attach antennas to buildings. But if, say, the Village Theater or other buildings owners on Front Street don't want an antenna on their structure, it could very well be that the providers have to come back to the city and ask for a code amendment because they can't solve Front Street without new poles. So 5, if you leave it, and I'm not suggesting you do or don't, if you leave it, would give at least a hinge point for us to say, okay, we want to do this. We want to make sure that there is, complete service in Old Town, and Front Street is going to be kind of the hardest part of it, just because there's new poles. And the reason why the administration suggested no new poles is because there's basically a 0 setback from the buildings. The whole sidewalk is your pedestrian zone. They're not overly wide right now, and sticking additional poles in it seemed kind of contrary to, and we talked about that at this commission. And that was supported by Infrastructure Committee to not allow additional poles on front. So I don't know. I mean, it could be clarified because I think it is a little bit vague, but I don't know. And to your point, Ron, I don't know when 5G happens, which would maybe in this time frame. I don't know if any of us know what that even looks like.
Well, the discussion is 2020.
So maybe since it's a
5G may be coming
placeholder.
forward, but I guess the question I have is, should it be on this list? Because small cell has its own package. And would it make any difference if it's in Old Town versus Central Issaquah?
Well, I think what Keith was saying is Old Town specifically has issues that we didn't solve with the small cell code changes because of the inability to put additional poles there.
Okay.
So I can see why that should be there. I'm a little bit not happy with the word "make improvements," suggesting that the city is going to do that, but maybe
Review.
address
It's more of a
need.
review. It's a placeholder to say that we know we have these issues, but maybe what it needs to do is be sitting on the 2019 to 21. Maybe it's the fact that it's pushed out so far, and it really needs to be a short-term action item rather than a long-term action item.
But then change it to be more reviewy
Yeah.
and makey.
Exactly.
Supporting and reviewing, or,
Yeah.
What would
Okay,
happen if we
and-
got requests for permits a year or two from now?
well, we have to review it
Yeah.
already,
And we have addressed that with the small
Right.
cell stuff,
Right?
right?
but some of that may be saying, sorry, you're gonna have to go to the building owners. If the building owners say no, then they're gonna come back, and we'll have to address that when it comes up.
So if we change it to support and review, or something like that, do you want to keep it in there but move it up to 2019?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
And even at a higher level than this, just infrastructure in general, I'm wondering if there's ongoing studies that always are looking at our area's infrastructure and how it's handling our current capacity and forecasted
Yes.
demand.
Yes,
Okay, so that's always happening
that's
anyways.
citywide. That's
Okay.
always happening.
So I guess this is really just saying specifically for Old Town, we want to make sure that that area is staying connected as well as every other neighborhood.
Yeah, you could phrase something like ensure internet activity and cell service is adequate along the Front Street corridor, has adequate quality and speed or something like that. Because if we revisit it in 2 years and cell service is great, then everything's great.
Check that box.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on the 2022 to 2025? Okay.
You know, since we're talking about number 4, I understand why it's in our long-term as far as priorities go, but I think it actually does lead to an interesting discussion about how to solve some parking issues in Old Town. I know that council has put it to staff to say, hey, let's find some parking. But part of mitigating that, I think, could really be actually putting a parking structure that's really more closer to Gilman and it's down and out of Old Town. But investing in our trolley structure and actually having it go late night and actually having it be something that parking is actually more off-site from Old Town and is more in Central, I think is a really interesting idea. And I think it's something that actually does connect through to our more urgent action plan items. And I think it actually talks about putting Issaquah a little bit different from our fellow communities and puts us a little bit more on the map. So I wish that this wasn't on the long term. I get why it is, but I think it's something that could be visited a little bit sooner and help do things.
Okay. Anybody else on that topic?
I mean, I think it's going to be addressed when you're looking at parking. I think if a consultant comes in and doesn't address an option such as moving parking a little bit farther away and including some kind of a busing trolley system, then that consultant's not considering all options. I think if we moved it up, it would be a little bit more specific from us saying, yes, this needs to be included.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at things in a near-term drawer, they've got the parking study right up there at the beginning, and that's the first domino.
So moving it or mentioning considering the trolley in the parking study, or?
Well, I mean, it aligns with my original comment, which was, or earlier comment, which
Right.
was, I think doing the parking study is an important thing, but even just for optics, like knowing that we're also thinking about how to relieve congestion in other ways,
Okay.
and not providing parking or some parking alternates, and then a few years down the road, maybe then thinking of another solution. So it's just doing it in parallel, I think.
Okay.
And it will be probably part of the parking study, but having it on the list is good, I think.
So we'll kind of rework.
You could add after shopping shuttle, out of area parking solutions and then put et cetera after that, so it looks like it's not a finite list.
Keith,
Keith, you're getting flashed.
So he's saying to add out of the parking area.
To number 4.
Out of area parking added beyond the shopping.
Yes, yeah,
As another potential mobility option.
yes.
What is the trolley?
Oh, really? Whoa.
I'm still kind of new here.
Okay, so we have a trolley, a really old trolley. So you know the rail that goes right behind
Yeah.
here? Okay, so that's the trolley rail. And if you walk up there past, behind some of the stores, behind Jack's, there's a
Yeah, like it
there's a
runs during
depot.
like Christmas.
Yeah, there's a depot.
So the idea would be like to run
And there's a building right there too that stores
not
the
here
trolley
during the end of
that
summer.
runs it's in the summertime, I think, and at Christmas time, and yeah.
holiday thing.
He wants that to be an extension of ST3.
It's really cool. Yeah.
I don't think you can use it as a actual,
ST4.
Well, you know what? If you connect it up to ST3 and then people get off and they get into the quaint trolley, I mean,
Yeah, I
well, that'd
think
be
that
fine,
it's an
except it
unutilized resource.
crosses over Front Street, which you
you know
have to
what?
close off Front Street.
Details.
He wants magic
Traffic,
Okay.
remember, traffic?
What?
Okay, so we will rework some of the parking and transit and mobility options in the parking study and move some of that up and make sure it continues throughout. How about that? Okay? All right.
Oh, I have one last question,
Yes.
sorry. The public access and views of Issaquah Creek and
I'm
East
contagious.
Fork, is that not in the parks plan? I'm just curious like why that's called out separately.
I don't know if it's in the parks plan. I haven't seen it yet. Did you? I left at 3.
Is there a park plan yet?
We did, but not
To the
the
green-
Parks Plan.
I'm just wondering
But
why
no,
that's called out separately rather than the other
I think because
5,
it was
6
brought
things
it
in
was
the
brought
park
up so often. It's always brought up when we go to neighborhood meetings here. It's brought up a lot.
So once it's to highlight it?
We need to highlight it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the boundary. So this part that's hatched in red is currently zoned destination retail. And until adopted, is located in central Issaquah. If comes out of central Issaquah, it needs a place to live, potentially. I guess it could hang out there, but it would be nice if it had a place to live. An option is Old Town. But then if you all decide that that's something you want to recommend, you also have to consider what the zoning would be. So it could stay destination retail. It used to be professional office. It could be CBD. So that's a discussion that you all need to have before this goes to a public hearing again.
Can we talk boundary before we talk zoning?
Absolutely.
And can I add something? In my discussions, many with the attorney, because this is such a big topic of possible rezoning, he said that because through the central plan, we are removing it, if council goes with your recommendation. And he said we could still leave it as destination retail, still have it go with the central standards until we actually get to have a thoughtful discussion of what happens to it. So
Yeah.
it's not one of those, short discussions.
Okay,
that-
so it can not be in the CIP plan, but it can have the CIP standards applied to it.
Yes.
Until.
Until-
someone
Until
buys
and
it.
Right.
if you all decide.
Because the IC properties, intensive commercial that you recommended to move out, there actually is an IC zone that's not in central standards. So we weren't worried about those parcels because they have something to fall back on. But destination retail didn't. So we wanted to be sure there was a safety net for those parcels until we got around to figuring that out.
Makes sense.
So yeah, let's talk boundary, just the boundary.
So my first question is, east of Front Street, is there anything not covered in the hash line? Or is that literally everything up to the freeway right of way?
Everything north and west of that is in central.
Oh, yeah, well, I meant east of Front. I was just
Yeah.
asking to make sure I'm following the line, the boundary line correctly.
Okay,
We've covered everything until you hit
Yes.
freeway right of way.
yes,
Okay. That was more just a clarifying question.
okay.
So on that idea, there's kind of a little pocket down at the end of that. Can you?
At the, which end?
On the east end.
The east end.
Yep.
That is, you mean,
Use the mouse.
where's the mouse? Oh. Right here?
Yes.
That is right away. That's washed out right away.
Okay, so that's the discussion that happened the other day that goes down to that business.
Oh,
Park and Sam Kyle stuff.
yeah, I can't, there we go, there's the
The
mouse.
actual
Is
hatch
that
stuff
right here?
is, right.
Like that little footbridge?
Where's 3rd Street? Yeah, 3rd Avenue. So yeah, this is it, in here.
So that's office.
There's no map there.
I know.
So that's office space?
There's an office building there, yes, or one or
Okay.
two.
And so if that's not included, it's just basically a little pocket of no man's land. So, okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have the same feeling as the rest of Gilman that's over there, but it does have the same feeling as the areas around Third and Birch and Dogwood and all of that. Okay.
So if council approves it to drop out of Central Issaquah and we don't add it, is it just, I mean, we'd create zoning for it and it would just be a,
It could keep the same zoning. It would just
Yeah,
be a
okay.
really small sub-area
Yep.
right there.
I mean, I just asked the question because I was like, well, what if we don't do anything?
Yeah.
But, because I see no problem with adding it, Old Town. But
Because
I was curious what that-
the difference is then when we added all of the sub-area, like design standards applied to it.
Right.
Whereas if not, the zoning wouldn't change, but you would have different design standards.
So
is
if
the
it
difference.
stays, right, yeah, if it stays destination retail, yeah, they wouldn't have the design, they would just have the zoning, yeah, that's
So
correct.
you could build the same building types, but the look and feel of the buildings would be
No, the
different.
height would be different, too.
It would stay as it is in destination retail, so I think the max height is 65 feet. I'd
Okay.
have to double check. Should I pull that up?
The Old Town proposal.
Okay.
I'm in support of this boundary. I think it makes sense to have that. I mean, we even call it Old Route 10, right? It feels like, I mean, it definitely, if that street met its vision, it would feel like part of Old Town, I think.
Okay.
I think I remember talking about a vision of that street that was like kind of diners and that kind of feeling and embracing that. And I think we already have some, you know, the Grange is there, Triple X is there. I think it's got a lot of Old Town type stuff going for it already.
All right, Bohm's is there as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it has the potential to kind of be this really awesome blend of this high density that we foresee along Gilman and then the feeling of Old Town to really complement our city in a way that we don't have it. So.
Okay.
And this lets us take Old Town all the way to I-90 pretty much.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think having it and being able to have an entry point where you have the signage there rather than farther back where it kind of is now is really important to be able to brand that area and bring people into that feeling.
It becomes more of a corridor rather than right now, once you hit the dairy, you kind of get that feel.
Yep.
Okay.
If we have to take the E off of Old Town, can we add an E to Old Route 10?
We'll take that under consideration.
Technical question.
That's very
That
tough.
in minutes.
I know, but that is.
Okay.
Anything else? It sounds like you guys are in favor of adding the whole piece to Old Town. Okay.
Then I've got a question about the southern boundary. Why the little divot at the very bottom of it? Because there's like 2 houses there and the rest looks like it's green.
You know,
So what's
That's
the
the
reason?
school. The green space is the school, isn't it?
yeah,
By the divot
but
that comes
the,
up.
yeah, the divot at the bottom, somebody brought that up the other day. And
'Cause it's inside of
been
the
that
Rainier
way
Trail.
since day one.
Right.
And Trish, was it annexed at that time? Was it not a part of the city?
No, it was part of the city.
It was
I'm
part
not
of the city?
sure. I know part to the south is not sewered, did not have sewers back then. I don't know actually if they ever did get sewers. So I think that might have been it, but I can't, that was a long time ago. I'd have to look to see why it has a tooth like that.
So what would be the value of adding it or leaving it out?
Well, it's like Troy said, if you take it out of some sub-area, it has to go into another sub-area.
Right, now, I realize that, but what would be,
I
because
think
right now it's on the inside of the Rainier Trail, so it's actually, I mean, if you want to use the Rainier Trail as kind of a boundary marker, you could. But what would be the advantages to having that part of the Old Town or leave it out of Old Town?
Well, I mean, it's, the zoning won't change. And I don't even know what it's zoned right now. You're right, I
Can we
need
get
the
a sense of
zoning
what
map.
the zoning and sub-area is for everything that's kind of south and southwest of here?
Right, well, I think
Of here, a lot of it is Sycamore's.
Sycamore's to the west.
Yeah, Sycamore's to the west, and it's single-family suburban and single-family estates. Some of it is multifamily, what's Kalkari, high or medium?
High, I think.
High? Yeah, okay. And a little bit of it is multifamily high to the primarily, and that's around to the south and the west is what those are.
Okay.
And those 3 or 5 lots right there, I don't know what the zoning is offhand, but I would guess is one of those single-family zones.
So Trish suggested another van tour.
Yes,
I
she
did.
All right.
Would-
So
Would it-
if you guys are all into it, the stay late, light later.
Yes, summer's good. It's light.
Would anyone be up for that?
I am.
Always.
Only if it's dark and rainy.
When I'm driving, we're out of gas.
John's out. All right.
That's authentic.
I want to see how many gallons you can buy at Grange again.
Okay.
That was
So we
pretty
can-
exciting.
We can schedule a tour.
Yay.
I have a question. Going up to Cherry, why is it not just follow a street?
Cherry.
Where are?
Creek, right?
On the
That's the creek, I think.
left-hand side,
Oh, yeah, it does. It follows the creek.
It does?
I think, are you talking, I got to remember to do this. Is this Cherry?
Yeah,
So you're talking right here? Yes, it follows the creek.
it does?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the creek.
Meandering creek.
Which I think makes sense, because the creek, even though the grid looks continuous, the creek is a pretty natural buffer. That makes a natural transition.
Just you can't tell that's the creek when you have the red line there, so.
I'll put it on there next time. Okay.
So I'm going to go back to the south end.
Okay.
So does it make sense to have the big school property and any of the areas that are on the west of that in Old Town?
And all the apartments.
Well, they have a very different character. I think when I hear people talk about Old Town, what they generally think of is kind of where we are now, north and south of Sunset, just east and west of Front. It's a different feel. There's a big school. I mean,
Yep.
that's a discussion for you all to have, though.
So my perspective is that the south end doesn't necessarily make sense in that kind of Old Town area, but I'm not exactly sure what the property to the west on First Place is.
Elementary school.
That's where Clark is, and then there's some houses along front.
Okay, so that's the elementary school, and that's the high school. Oh, that is, okay, I'm oriented different. Yeah, so I think you do need to keep the community center in, but not necessarily stuff that's south of it. Yeah, I think you could cut it off south of the community center and then take it up north of the school.
So we use Darst or Evans as the southern border?
Yeah, probably Evans, and then taking it down.
Why was the whole school property included?
I'm sorry, pardon me?
Why was the school originally scoped in?
Because there were so many community facilities already in Old Town that it just seemed to make sense, because the school is considered a community facility. So we put that in as well.
Do we gain anything by taking it out?
I don't think so.
I don't think anything's
Yeah.
going to change one way or the other. The school's already built.
Yeah, school's gonna do it at once.
The thing for me is it just doesn't feel like as compact of an area, like a contiguous area with that bottom portion, but I would agree with Joy. I don't think it necessarily improves anything to take it out. It was just a consideration.
I mean,
Okay.
it would be called out here.
So we leave the south.
So it sounds like we're in agreement about adding the proposed Old Route 10 as drawn.
Well, something else we can do at our next meeting is just do what we did with Central and bring a big map, or bring 3 maps that have the zoning and the land use, you know, the aerial and a
That-
plain
that
map.
would
And
be
you guys
super
can
helpful.
play with it and
Yep.
draw on it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But tentatively, we're looking at this and leaving it as is. We're following the recommendations.
Yeah.
I think that's the general feel. We just want to pick at it a little bit, like some of those properties down at the bottom.
Yeah, 'cause
Yes, you can include that in the notes.
I think because we can kind of futz around with the bottom, but if it's not really gonna impact anything, I don't really want to change the boundary and confuse the public with
Okay.
a line that's been drawn for several years in a row.
Okay. Well, we'll bring it and you guys can look at it and we'll see what happens. Okay. All right. So I just wanted to step back real quick. There were 4 things that we were going to address. One was, does this draft capture our previous intent? And assuming that you all have read it, do you think that the draft that's in your packet does what you want it to do still? Yeah?
I do.
Okay. Did we learn anything through CIP visions? And that may be a question that has to wait to be answered, but is there anything you can think of right now that could still be applied?
I think that I learned, I'll speak for myself, that we, because these neighborhoods are so close to each other, I kind of feel more justified giving these more stringent guidelines to Old Town and really keeping it as true to our intent as we want with our codes, and not feeling ashamed about that. Being able to say, no, these are our height limits, and really sticking true to our guns in Old Town, because, right, our neighborhood just down the road can accommodate you in another fashion if that's what you need. So I feel a little more justified in saying, let's go hardcore with what we really want to see Old Town look like.
Okay, and just as a side note too, kind of along those lines, right after this gets approved, we start with the design standards and the regulations, so it'll be fresh on your brain and you can
And I
make sure
do
that
like
happens
this
there.
format better.
Okay.
Compared to looking at April, I think this is an improvement. I like the direction we're going.
Good.
I was going to say, I really like the format of this. My only concern is that the format of this is so different from the CIP. And so I don't know how to mesh the two of those without going back to the CIP and saying, change it to this. Which
I didn't
we-
think it needed to be.
You don't?
No, but I think because that kind of goes back to this whole thing of Old Town being
Is
Old Town
distinct.
and it's its own thing. Like, I kind of like it floating as its own lofty kind of concept.
Do you think there's anything in here that needs to mention the CIP or connect the two of them?
I like it being its own world almost, you know?
I think a shout out to Confluence as the transition neighborhood
Okay,
would be helpful, because in Confluence, we shout out Old Town. I think it would be good to reflect that.
I think there should be a place to talk about each of the entrances to Old Town and the primary spots of entry.
Gateways.
Kind of the gateways, if you will.
Okay.
From the south end, from Sunset, from I-90, pretty much in every direction. Not every street that comes into it, but the major.
Yeah.
View.
We did talk about that
We
when we
did,
were talking about the
yeah.
Old Town plan.
right, it was in the old one, I think, the April version. Okay.
I have a question. So if we incorporate Old Route 10, it'll be in the Old Town sub-area, but are we going to brand it as Old Town, or is it going to be branded as Old Route 10? I don't expect you to answer that question right now. But I think that's a really interesting discussion for us to have, is do we have two brands, both of which are old-timey and vibrant, or do we have one brand?
Essentially, then it becomes like Central Issaquah, where you have your two neighborhoods,
Yep.
where you have your old Route 10 neighborhood in
Yeah.
Old Town and your Old Town neighborhood. in
But
Old
you
Town.
don't necessarily need to do like in the Central Issaquah where you have like different design standards for them. It could still be one cohesive design standard, but you would perhaps do branding and wayfinding differently.
I think
Yeah.
it'll brand itself.
Yeah, I like
Yeah,
that.
But I just think if the community thinks that
right,
Old Route 10 is something different
Right.
in Old Town, then I think the branding and signage needs to reflect that, even if from like a planning document, we just treat them as one cohesive area.
okay.
I think that's a good point. So we need to figure out how we address that in this document without separating them entirely, but mentioning the inclusion and what, I don't know whether you even go to the point of saying what the vision is for that area or whether that delineates it too much.
And that might be something that, I'm thinking out loud here, that might be something to add to the short to medium term action plans, is to engage with the community, particularly the business owners along Old Route 10, and say, do they want to be branded along with Front Street, or do they
Right.
want to be branded distinctly? I
Well,
think
and
that's-
right now, because Old Town, or Old Route 10 is not a part of this, there are no policies regarding Old Route 10. So that is something that we would need to add before this comes back to public hearing, if you guys want to see that. And if we do, then you mention it, and you all say, there's a vision for Old Route 10 in the existing Central Issaquah plan that talks about having that, I don't know what kind of feel it is, but it mentions it, whatever feel it is. And it can be a policy to maintain that feel and then build on that in the standards.
I wonder if a section about kind of the unique places or kind of treasures within Old Town as a whole could talk about specific properties that are really, really key, or areas. So, it could be as large of an area as Old Route 10, or it could be something as important as the community center. And just talking about, we want to make sure we preserve these.
So are you talking about the
particular
treasures
things.
list that we have? Because that one's
is
about to be
there-
updated, is why I'm asking.
Is there a treasures list that's specific to
It's
Old
in,
Town
it's in the
sub-area?
comprehensive plan, and at least two-thirds of those things are in Old Town.
Okay.
But that's going to be revisited, too.
Okay, I guess I'm
Probably
wondering,
next
I want
year.
to make sure that the Old Town treasures are called out in the Old Town
Okay.
plan, I guess. But I realize that once you duplicate, you have to make sure they align, so I guess there's that to fight too, but.
Well, and I think going back to the original idea of Old Route 10, versus Old Town, and how do you reconcile this? I mean, it could just be as simple as treating it all as one, and then within this structure where we talk about placemaking and, traditional building, whatever, we can just sprinkle it throughout.
I think what I'm saying is I think there needs to be a little bit longer conversation after
Yeah,
Old
sure.
Route 10 gets brought in
Yeah.
to say, do
What
we
is
want to treat Old Route 10 just as a part of Old Town, and Old Town has just kind of grown? Or have we brought in a slightly unique neighborhood that has its own sense of place, that's sharing a sub-area, but still is its own?
And that's part of your zoning discussion too, once it gets adopted in there.
But I think I just want to make the point that even after we've decided on zoning and after we've decided on this iteration of the sub-area plan, I think the city needs to help drive a conversation between Old Town and New Old Town. Just to figure out about what's the right way to
Yeah.
speak about and to brand that new space.
Agreed.
So thinking through the treasures, we might think through which one of those should be included in pictures, because there's a lot of great pictures through here. And I do notice that the Front Street Market is there. Maybe we could replace that with something else that's, maybe still here.
Before and after.
Nostalgia.
Another Front Street Market.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So did you find the addition of the action items helpful?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you had a good discussion. And then we just talked about the boundary. Okay. So we will bring this back probably for discussion another time. I'm looking at Trish. We've been going back and forth on our schedule
The
all day.
schedule has been a wild one. We're hoping to bring this back on the 26th of April, which
April.
is your next official meeting. We also have a public hearing that night on TDRs in the Highlands.
But considering we still need to fit in a tour now,
Right,
we have
and
to
I'm
figure out where that
curious
fits in this discussion.
If we have the public hearing, yeah, and I need to find out Keith's schedule for the tour because he would be the driver and so,
Gotta make sure the van's available too.
right, we have to get that van with no gas in it.
And then are we going to end up adding back in that conversation about the strategic plan?
Right, that would be
Yes,
in the beginning of May.
That's beginning of
in
May.
May.
That's the first
already
meeting in May.
So
Okay.
I think, I don't know when exactly the tour would be. A lot of it's on Keith's schedule. But we have
Yeah.
public hearings. Well, we could have it the 24th. And the other piece, would you want to wait for the new members, or would you want to do this before June?
What other piece?
Pardon?
You said the other piece. What other piece?
Oh, the other question is, would you want to have the tour before we have new members, or wait
Or
till
you
the
mean
new members?
you mean the public hearing or the tour?
The tour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the
Tour's
tour
probably
could be
good.
as early as the 24th of May. That's the
Yeah.
earliest the tour could be, and we could just bump maybe the TIP.
Okay.
we can use the trolley for the tour.
We could.
We can just go back and forth, though.
I do think it's a good idea to have new members on the tour. It's a great way to immerse them into, this is what we do, this is to really see this connection between the abstract and reality. So,
But
if-
that's a month out, though.
it is, I would rather have us do the tour before, based on our schedule, but maybe what we do is we do the tour ahead of that, and we think about doing something in like September before the weather gets too gnarly, and you can think about, because maybe that is actually something the city thinks about doing. I know that's weird to think about every year, of a way of integrating new members into and saying, hey, this is how we interact in our community. This is why, because it's really important. I had a huge knowledge gained from that, being able to see, this is where we want to go, this is, because it's easy to look at what it is now, rather than our whole
Right.
job is to see what is it that we want it to be and how is it that we're planning for the future,
Right,
so.
because Keith would love to do another tour when the new members come. Because he's all
You're
about
driving,
this.
right?
Yeah, he's the MC. Well, I will shoot for
So
the
it might be a
20
twofold thing, if we want to get this done to be able to fit with our agenda items, and something that we consider saying, hey, this is a
Right,
valuable
maybe it's a
tool.
bigger kind of tour after June.
So the April 26th, Do you think that's going to be a long?
The TDRs? No, actually, because this is from the end of development agreements, Issaquah Highlands that you all did, and council's approved the end of the development agreements, but the TDR piece, they talk about it in the adopted regulations, but they didn't actually make a map. And so that's what this is bringing forward, to sort of clean up what was just adopted. So there's not a lot to change, fix, mend.
Okay, with that understanding, why can't we bring back the Old Town and do both of them the same night?
Yes, we're going to. We didn't find out about that until this morning.
Okay.
So we can do, again, the 26th. We can't do the public hearing then, though, because we didn't advertise Old Town in time. But we could certainly then do the tour. The first open real meeting that I have that would be open for the tour would be May 24th. But I don't know if the driver's available on May 24th. He looks available.
Nothing but free time.
Right, nothing but net.
Okay, we can do that offline.
Okay.
So are there any more comments, questions on Old Town for right now? So thank you.
Yeah, good discussion, thank you.
And so I am going to open up the, for public comments.
Sure.
Anybody would like to come in, and this is specifically on Old Town?
David Kapler, 255 Southeast Andrews Street, so Old Town, very close to here. Parking. As far as I'm concerned, the city has no parking enforcement unless you park on a red curb, for the fire zone or something like that. And maybe sometimes if you park in a handicap zone. How much money do we want to spend on creating parking garages in the city so that people that don't even pay for Sound Transit can come to downtown Issaquah and catch the 554 to go to Seattle or whatever? So I think parking's got to be figured out and needs to be improved, but we do not want to become in this area or the central Issaquah just a bunch of parking garages for light rail in the future. Engagement. We've had actually some good engagements locally. One was very negative originally, and that had to do with the teen center and the inappropriate placement of it at 2nd and Bush. And we filled to overcapacity the trail house there with people that were outraged about that. But then, through a process, it got moved to a more appropriate place by the community center, between the pool and the community center, and the community is very happy with that, and there's no issue. The other one is the parking, dealing with rather, not parking, but the pass-through traffic and the traffic calming. And over about almost 40 people or more showed up on a Saturday morning at the trail house to view the city's proposal for common traffic calming on Andrews, Bush, some of the side, the north-south avenues, and Alder Street. It was a great crowd, people very positive, and except for chicanes, people are very positive about the temporary traffic calming devices. If we have a purpose, you can get people out, but just say we want to talk about the Old Town, you're not going to get anywhere. You got to have something that grabs people, either positively or negatively. I missed last night's meeting, but 13 cubic feet is what's going to be allowed in these communication posts or whatever on these piles on posts, 13 cubic feet up in the air, and then power supply and other things can be on the ground. 13 cubic feet, by my calculation, is the same as 21 5-gallon buckets. It's a lot of stuff hanging up in the air. And as I was watching this on my phone last night, looking at Mount Squaw Mountain on my phone, and I was looking at Squaw Mountain, watching the meeting last night, and I realized that power pole there could have one of these monsters in my alley. And I think we have to think about view impacts and impacts in general about these things. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Carrie McGill with Raleigh Properties, 1595 Northwest Gilman Boulevard. And I just had 4 points. Looking through the Old Town Plan, it looks pretty good to me, but there is a lot of mention about preserving views, but it doesn't say which views. Views of the creek, are there signature views, all views? So a little bit more work there needs to probably happen to identify priorities of views. I was really glad to hear you guys starting to talk about connections to other areas, because that was really important in the district visions. It was emphasized in so many areas, and this one doesn't really have how it ties into Issaquah Highlands and Talus and makes those connections, and so that's another piece that you might want to look at. Consolidation of services is another thing, since ground is so scarce on Front Street, particularly around like garbage, for example. Maybe a common garbage facility that could be utilized by many people would reduce the number of dumpsters in the backs of buildings and create more optional uses for that property instead. And then the last one's kind of minor, but you might want to define what cut-through traffic is. I think what you mean is that it's for people from other cities going through Issaquah and not stopping, but we don't want it maybe to mean if you're from the Highlands and you need to go to Talus, are you cutting through? So maybe just a little thought around that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Mabbitt, and I run the Grange at 145 Gilman Boulevard. We've been there since 1943, moved from Renton we started in Renton in 1934 and moved to Issaquah in 1943. I don't have that much to say because I think I've said it at some meetings before. I'd really like us to be considered part of Old Town. I think when you consider a couple of things, branding, there's anyone will tell you there's one brand. You don't go, we're going to call one Old Town and one Old Route 10. Everybody knows what a town is, but nobody who's lived here, 10 years or less knows what Route 10 is. And I think that with nearly 150 years of business between us and Boems, you would have to consider us part of Old Town. The other thing I think is really worth considering in terms of that section of Issaquah being considered Old Town is in this last, I've been managing the Grange for about a year and a half, and we've really done a lot of outreach into the Highlands, and both with Highlands Day and then I did STEM Night at Klahani. And the diversity of those events has been astonishing to me. I grew up in Shoreline and then lived in Ballard for a million years. And yet, as those events end and as I go back and work in my store, I see those faces back in the Grange because they picked up our information and they come in and they want to see the baby chicks and they want to see the gardening things that we do, and they come and buy the pet foods and the scout gear, and so it really is quite a gateway, I think, between one of the fastest growing communities in Issaquah and Old Town. And then secondly, the Grange going forward, and as long as my team is there and as long as I'm there, our budget for marketing is in community sponsorship and community giving. This spring we will be holding a symposium on cashier harassment that we're going to try to work with the chamber and get cashiers and those folks from all over and really come up with sort of the #MeToo, here's what you do when that customer gets a little fresh, and give people those sorts of tools. Secondly, we're working with Audra Gaines-Mulkern, who is a documentarian who is doing a documentary about women farmers throughout history. It's one of those things working backwards. She already has the distribution. She just needs the money to make the film. PBS has already said they'll run it, and so the Grange is really taking an active role in finding and giving the money to to make that documentary. The Grange is also going through a remodel. We're just getting to the beginning of it and realizing that we don't want people from San Diego and Eugene telling us what the Grange should look like. We want people in Issaquah telling us what the Grange should look like. And so that remodel, including a barn in which we'll have barn dances where Old Town can get down, will be forthcoming, along with electronic vehicle charging stations, because we are a fuel stop and we want to be a fuel stop for the next 100 years. We love our involvement in downtown Issaquah. I mean, it's been for me, it's the shiniest thing I've done since I've taken over, and we really, really want that to continue. So I would just, when the subject comes up of calling our part of the woods Old Route 10, I really would strongly advocate and ask you to fight to make it part of Old Town, because that's how we feel and that's who we support. And I think it's an easier thing to brand. So call us Gateway, call us the Gateway to Old Town. I think that's fine, but I'd assume the Grange. And I'm sure, I mean, Julius Bohm, what he got here from Ravenna in '52. And there's a guy who ran the torch for the Berlin Olympics in 1936. I mean, this is some history that you just don't have here without that story and without it being part of us. So, I don't know, keep us as part of Old Town, and thank you so much for hearing me out.
Thanks, John.
One thing I would like to see is some connectivity between Old Route 10 and downtown. If there was some connection where you could just walk, where you didn't have to walk around, that would be great.
Right.
Yeah. Are you asking me to?
No, I'm just saying, no, just a comment.
Because, and it's not an unfair question. I think if that is something, if that's a necessary thing, I mean, we're really open to anything. I mean, this has been a great job, and we have funds, and we have a lot that we want to do. So that, along with, I think, number 6 about creating a community garden at one point, that's all great, so. But yeah, I agree. I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about geographically, but.
I'm not either, just a road.
Yeah.
Honey.
So I'm way up high compared to most. When I look at the building blocks of the city and how we're going to plan and organize it, I want the forms for all the sub areas to be the same, so that every time somebody has to use the tool, they don't have to relearn the tool that they're using in the organizational structure. So I want this to be organized like the Central Issaquah plan is organized, using the same component parts. Because when the planners have to use the tool, it is way easier for them to just use the same tool, but with different language in the tool, than having to learn the construct. And same with the community. And so I resist that because it's a different part of town, it should have a different looking tool. It should have different language, different descriptions, and different focal points, but have the same structure. So then, given that I want that to happen, I'm going to describe what that would look like. You'd get the maps. You already talked about it. And you cut off the areas that make sense to have a specialized character within Old Town. And each of those areas gets their own design standards. You already have the start of that within your Old Town. They do have these mapped areas where the rules are slightly different in some areas rather than others. And that is how you can deal with the southern area. It should have a different set of standards than the Gilman area. And the Gilman area potentially should have a different set of standards than the central Main Street area. And the Cherry Street, same thing. That's just me theorizing. Now, what do you do when you start talking about the connections and you say, where are the parks? And you say, well, you know what? We actually need our parks map, just like we have the green necklace for the CIP, to overlay into our Old Town area so that we can understand that our parks are appropriately placed and that we have the pathways and corridors that link them all. At the same time, we need to understand our traffic and roads standards and how they will be used. For example, Gilman on that end has an enormous right-of-way, and that is currently unplanned. And my understanding is it's going in the CIP for a potential planning effort for that end of Gilman. I don't think that was on this list, but I think that would need to be added to the list. And then when I imagine what that street could be, I want that to be the festival street, because it doesn't go through, you don't have to shut down traffic, but it could be the street you close down, you use the Grange, you use the big parking lots, and you have your weekend dues. And then that festival street in the middle of Old Town, I don't think is as important. It might be a smaller thing. I think you need to rethink the Old Town plan now that you have a whole new area that needs to fit in and can augment it. So I wouldn't want to lose sight of that. Tours, absolutely, every time, because you don't know unless you've gone through. So I'm going to reiterate really fast. Structure the same for the CIP. Mapping, same as the CIP. Parks, the same as the CIP. And then let your imagination go forth so that you can describe the special areas that you want to highlight and create within the whole of Old Town. Thanks.
And seeing nobody else, I'm going to close the audience comments. Anything else that you guys would like to kind of touch upon to be added to our next meeting? I do want to say one thing, that in the original central plan, that part of Highway 10, Old Route 10, was going to be set up as a completely different kind of a 50s look in there. And so it was going to be really, unique part of the city. So that, I don't think that's going to happen now, but that's what it was going to be. AJ.
I think I would just echo the comment about views. I think that got brought up in the CIP, that we had a lot of references to views, but we didn't have anything specific. I think that's something that still needs to be tightened up. And so I think Old Town will have the same issues. That we can't protect our views until we've gotten more specific about what that actually means.
I think it would also be wise to discuss what through traffic is. Define that as whether it's out of the community pass-through traffic or internal pass-through traffic. And actually, to Connie's point, having the two documents the same, I'd like to bring that up as a discussion, feedback from my commissioners. It's actually, I think it's a worthy suggestion.
I think we need to think about how to do it without necessarily tearing apart both of the different documents, because they are very different. I think there's a lot of value to this particular document, but I think Connie brought up some very important points about making sure that the information is there for things like parks and mobility, to make sure that they are called out appropriately rather than glossed over in this area. I don't know if that deals with structure as much as content.
I agree. I think it's more of a content of a double check rather than necessarily restructuring the document to be the same.
Okay, so you have homework now. Go back and just kind of put the two together and see if you can come up with anything that either the language or just some specific that might have been forgotten. I don't think at this point in time we should go back and, although I'd love to have them exactly the same, I think we need to get this approved so that we can get on to looking at the codes and making sure that this stuff is done. If it's just a matter of all the stuff in it is great, it just doesn't look the same, maybe at some point in time when there's nothing else to do, you can go back and change it. But I'm hoping to get through this so that we can actually do all those codes that Kristen put up on the screen. So ideas for next meeting, if you have time to kind of put them together. You don't have to look through everything, but if there's something that really stands up, oh, we got to look at traffic. Well, maybe this is the language that we should use too. And I think that's what City Council wanted us to do, was to compare and make sure it was similar in most instances. So with that, there's nothing else?
We're still trying to find a date for training. I've heard back from some of you all, and maybe we can adjourn it and then talk about different dates, because it'll just sort of be a scheduling thing. So do you want to adjourn the meeting and then we can talk about training? Okay.
So I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 7:55. Close enough. So with that, we're done for this evening. Thank you for the comments. It's awful nice to have people come and continue the conversation, because you always come up with some ideas that we haven't thought about. So thank you.
Okay.